Hello, friends. How's everybody today? Welcome. Here's the Global Town Hall for April of 2023, and I have 6 people here with me. That's terrific. Welcome. And here comes somebody else. Oh, somebody with a foreign script. I'm not sure whether that's Georgian or some kind of different kind of script. Anyway, so we will soon find out who are. Oh, this is somebody with a. Okay.
That's Greek, Meta.
Is that Greek?
I think it's that Leda Raptis.
Yeah, it could be Leda. Anyway, so we have here Leda and we have Michael Cohen. And here comes somebody named Kelly. And we have somebody called iPhone. And I don't know who that is. Who's iPhone? Which one of you claims to be a telephone?
That's Al Jubitz calling in.
All right. Hello, Al.
I'll try to figure out the iPhone part.
That's fine, as long as we get acquainted. And here's somebody named Kelly. Hello, Kelly. I think you're a newbie, right?
Yeah, I'm Kelly. I interviewed you almost a year ago, I think, in Humboldt County, California.
Sure, I remember that very well. Yeah, you have a very interesting talk show. You interview people. Well, I know it has to be interesting. You interviewed me. So you had a good it was fun. It was very nice.
Yeah, I interviewed someone recently on the war, and it's very surprising to me how the anti-war movement is so like supportive of Putin, and just they're supportive of Putin. So that's been my, I'm anti-war just like everybody else, but at the same time, I would hate to be left alone and not helped if marauders were coming in my house. I'm not that pacifist.
Why is it supportive of Putin? That's my question. Why is the anti-war movement supportive of Putin?
That is my question as well. That's the question that I have today, that I, usually I will watch on YouTube and not join them.
Get people's thoughts about that, because I don't know the distribution. I'd love to see a poll. What, if somebody really would do a poll of peace activists or, people that we normally are in contact with, to see what the distribution is. But it is unpleasant to me to realize that there are an awful lot of people who would just be perfectly happy to have. Well, I won't comment further because you are on the same wavelength. Listen, let's see what people think about this. Let me start with Tariq, because Tariq Ralph is, I presume you're in Vienna, your home, right?
I am, hello Meta, I am in Villach. Villach is in the Alps, in the border with Italy and Slovenia, but in Austria.
Oh, okay. Well, are you on vacation or?
I am on a small vacation, yes.
Well, good. Have a good time. You can't be doing skiing there now, can you?
Well, there is still some snow on the top of the tallest mountains, but I'm a little bit below.
Mm-hmm. Okay, listen to what, this question is a very interesting one that Kelly has raised, although her face has just gone blank. I don't know where you went, Kelly. Why don't you comment on that, Tariq? Tell us your impression of how that looks from Europe.
Well, Europe is solidly behind Ukraine, even though people are having to pay higher prices for food and energy, but they are still solidly behind Ukraine and the effort to have Ukraine recover its lost territories.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you are I don't know what circles you travel in. You're pretty much in officialdom almost, aren't you? So if we asked grassrootsy people, activists that might be the kind of people who would tune in on this show, then, by the way, I'm going to start calling it a forum if I can remember to, because it sounds more dignified than a show. Anyway, what would European activists say? Would you say that the distribution is anything like favorable to the Russian side?
I think public opinion is divided in certain sectors. So I wouldn't say that it's favoring Putin, but so there's a large segment that is supporting Ukraine, and there is a small section that is anti-war. They're not pro-Putin, but they say that they can see some reasons why the Russians did what they did, if I can put it that way.
Mhm. I can see that too, but it doesn't excuse it to me. Anyway,
Yeah.
here I talk too much. Let's see what other people think. Others? Alida, I think you're going to be you're one of the people who've spoken on this before, so I'll let you.
Yeah, well, I sort of agree with Derek in the sense that, I mean, if Bush, for example, 20 years ago, could say that the Iraq was a threat to the US, and this is why they invaded. Iraq is, 12,000 miles away from the US. And if that was sort of acceptable, what is Putin going to say now, where the NATO is just next door to them?
Mhm.
Of course, that doesn't excuse, nothing excuses the bombing and all of that. But, I mean, we have to have a bit of, none of the two have the moral high ground, none of the two superpowers. But as the little ones, what do? Well, we just say, stop the fighting. Both sides. No expansion of NATO, and Putin to go back where he was.
Okay. To remind people that we have a website called tosavetheworld.ca, and it's there's a separate page for each of the forums that we run, including the monthly Global Town Hall, which this is. And if you go to the website tosavetheworld.ca and look for videos, or just enter the number of the show or the title of the show, it will take you to the specific page where you can watch the recording once I get it up, because sometimes it takes me a little while. And then there's a place where you can comment. So I encourage and even urge people to share your points of view in writing after, if it has anything to do with what we've talked about in this forum. So we can continue the conversation there online, and you can go there and see what other people have written. So we have some other latecomers, or not late, you're in good time, but there's Peter Brogdon. Hello, Peter.
Hi.
And we have another Peter Wadhams. I presume you're in Turin, Italy. Is that right, Peter?
Yeah.
Okay. And Michael Cohen. Tell me more about Michael Cohen, because I think we've interacted, but I have to say, I can't remember much about it, Michael.
Well, I'm here because there's an authority like Putin that people respect, even though they don't like the outcomes, and they don't know what this authority is, but we keep traveling towards some central figure or some central something that unites us and therefore is an antidote or a remedy for war.
And then also Al Gibbets is trying to get on.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thanks, Meta and Adam. I wanted to talk about increasing nuclear dangers. We now have no arms control treaty in force between Russia and the United States dealing with nuclear weapons.
Sorry, do you mean to say that the New START something's gone wrong there?
Yeah, the New START has been suspended on the 21st of February. President Putin announced the suspension of New START, and also Russia has not agreed to resume inspections, which were suspended because of COVID. So the United States was ready to restart inspections, but the Russians said they were not ready to do so. Also, in November of last year, the two sides were supposed to meet, of all places, in Cairo to talk about mutual concerns about each other's implementation of New START. The Russians are concerned that the United States is not dismantling strategic bombers and nuclear submarines carrying missiles in accordance with New START. And the Americans are concerned about the new weapon systems that Russia is building. So the Russians canceled this meeting, the Bilateral Consultative Commission, supposed to be held on the 30th of November. They canceled it one day in advance. So with the suspension of New START on the 21st of February, neither side is now formally implementing it, although both countries, the Americans and the Russians, have said that for the time being, they will not exceed the limits of New START. But we don't know how long this will last. The Russians further added that as long as the United States and NATO have the policy of strategic defeat of Russia, this is what the US Defense Secretary said earlier in the year, that the US policy is to effect the strategic defeat of Russia. And so the Russians have said, as long as this policy is in place, the war will not stop in Ukraine. They will not implement New START, and they are not ready to talk about any new follow-on agreements on nuclear arms control. So many in the arms control community are now very concerned that if New START were to completely collapse, both countries could immediately increase their deployed nuclear weapons, the ones ready to launch, by at least 1,000 or 1,500 each. They don't have to make new ones. They already have these weapons in storage, not deployed, and therefore they are not accountable under START. So all they need to do is move them out into the field and install them on nuclear submarines, put them back on bombers. So we would end up, instead of about 1,550 nuclear warheads each, with about 3,500 warheads for the US, about 2,600 warheads for the Russian Federation. We don't know whether the treaty prohibiting nuclear weapon testing, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, will survive. The Russians have made some noises about the requirement to resume nuclear weapons testing. The US has said that if any country resumes nuclear testing, the US will restart nuclear testing in Nevada. And I understand that the United Kingdom quietly encouraged the US to reopen Nevada so that the British could also test their weapons in Nevada, which they've been doing for the past 30 years or so before the Nevada test site was shut down by the US. So the other big concern is artificial intelligence. And people are concerned that if artificial intelligence is introduced into the nuclear command and control system, then the human potentially could be taken out of the decision chain. We could potentially have automated launch of nuclear weapons if the computers or early warning systems on either side detect what they think is a preemptive attack by the other side. So this is highly dangerous, and the situation can ramp itself very quickly out of control. So later in May, there will be some discussions in Geneva on controlling artificial intelligence, but that is more in the context of conventional weapons, not so much nuclear weapons. And then I'll make two more points and then I'll stop. The US is what they call prompt global strike and precision guidance munitions, which were actually started under Bush Sr. and then perfected under Bush Jr., where the US Defense Department has the capability now to launch an attack anywhere in the world on 1 hour's notice, using conventional weapons. And so this is now, for the Russians, this is now a new threat because they do not have the advantage in high technology, silicon chips, computers that the US has. So they are going to respond with making more nuclear weapons and also threatening satellites in space. Because if one can knock out satellites in space, then the internet is disabled and also global communications are disabled. And if those are disabled, the US's prompt global strike will be blinded and will not be able to work. Finally, China is involved in the big buildup. Estimates are that by 2030, they could have 1,000 nuclear weapons. By 2035, 1,500 nuclear weapons. So now we are entering not a bilateral arms competition, but a trilateral arms competition. And then when we add to it nuclear-powered submarines for Australia, that further complicates the situation in the Pacific. Now, unfortunately, Canada has been a complete bystander on these issues and has been meekly going along with what NATO and the US is doing on building up nuclear weapons, on reinforcing the role of nuclear weapons in NATO strategy. And we find the Canadian voice on arms control absent, and also the Canadian, the Department of Foreign Affairs, Global Affairs Canada, unfortunately, is not providing any funding to peace groups and civil society in Canada. On the other hand, they are giving big amounts of money to the Nuclear Threat Initiative for having a website on the International Partnership for Disarmament Verification. And also Canada fits into this new group that was set up a few years ago by the US called Creating the Environment for Nuclear Disarmament. So the goal of this is to that nuclear disarmament is not possible unless we create a particular environment, and nobody knows what this environment is. And as long as the war continues in Ukraine, and then as long as we have the policy of strategic defeat of Russia, we have gone into another sort of a circular situation, which there's a risk of it hurtling out of control. So that's my spiel for now.
Oh, Lord. Okay. I have two questions first, and then other people will, no doubt. One has to do with this Belarus thing. I think Putin was saying he was going to move nuclear weapons into Belarus. And the other is, I believe Ed Markey and some other people in Congress or senator have taken an initiative to prohibit AI control of nuclear weapons. Can you comment in either or both of those?
Yes. So Russia in February, when they announced the suspension of New START, also said that given that now this is a proxy war between NATO and Russia, Russia will move nuclear armed bombers into Belarus and by June, and also build silos for deploying ballistic missiles or mobile ballistic missiles in Belarus. And Russia emphasized that just like American nuclear weapons in the 5 NATO countries are under US control, the weapons Russia puts in Belarus will be under Russian control. As regards Senator Markey and his colleagues, they have put forward a bill that would prohibit the use of AI in connection with nuclear weapon systems. We don't know whether there will be sufficient support in Congress, 67 votes in the US Senate, to get this bill through and to make policy. Even if it becomes policy, there is no assurance that, in fact, AI will be kept out of the nuclear weapons command chain. Because officially it is said that only the President of the United States has the sole authority to launch nuclear weapons. But in practice, that is not true. The Defense Secretary, the Chief of the Military also can launch nuclear weapons if they think that the President is dead or the National Command Authority in Washington is no longer operational. So there is a lot of fudging in this area.
Has the president made any comment at all?
No, he has stayed away from this. Even when some time ago, when President Biden went into the hospital and he temporarily transferred executive authority to the vice president. This was, I think, for 12 hours of whatever, when he was under general anesthesia. That is when this question came up about the sole authority of the president. But he didn't make any comments. His officials made comments that only the president has the authority, or in the case when the vice president is acting president, he or she would have that authority.
Mhm. Okay, other people, you must have thoughts and questions.
My name is Al Jubitz. Meta, thank you for this forum. I come to you all from Portland, Oregon, USA, and the War Prevention Initiative under the management of Dr. Patrick Hiller. We're trying to prevent war. So as it relates to Ukraine, we failed. And so I asked myself, what could we have done to prevent that war? Immediately I go to my Rotary training. I've been a Rotarian a long time, and we have a pretty solid basis of value basis of goodwill and friendship. The thing that Michael Cohen was saying caught my attention, and I've got a phone call coming in. Let me delete it. Okay. So I think what I'm feeling is that the silence of nature could be our guide here. We all have an inner soul, or whatever we call it. And I know that nature, when I go out into nature on a hike, or even visually just looking at nature, I get recentered, let's say. And I'm thinking that the peace movement and the environmental movement ought to merge, and or that we adopt the environmental movement's language to preserve the earth. And in everything we do in the military field, we need to question on the basis of the earth. Morality is great, but people get fearful and don't trust other people, so morality only goes so far.
Now, I'm going to interrupt you here because I'm aware that I was told anyway that Tariq has a limited amount of time to be with us, and Tariq is really an extraordinary expert on nuclear matters. He's in Europe now, and I want to allow a comment and discussion based on his comments, and probably
I'll finish in 30 seconds because it ties to nuclear.
All right, take 30 seconds, but I really want to get back to the nuclear.
Happy to do it. Our enemy is not Putin or Zelensky or anyone. It's war and the tools of war, which are weapons. And we've got to start calling out militarism as the enemy of survival and nature.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'm sure that there are some other people here who are as alarmed by Tariq's comments as I am, and want to pursue some of these threats or dangers. So this is the time to talk about that. Mm-hmm. Yes, Lida.
I'm wondering, I just don't know, but what do you think could be the role of China? Because the advantage of China, of course, it's a big power, but at the same time, up to now, they had not taken sides, you see? So they might, maybe, I don't know, they might act as mediators, useful mediators. Everybody else is in one side or the other. Turkey is with NATO, and so on.
Yes, so China made the comments that they wanted to mediate between Ukraine and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
They put out a 12-point peace proposal a couple of weeks ago,
mm-hmm.
which was criticized and dismissed by the US and NATO, that they didn't feel that the Chinese had any role in mediating between Ukraine and Russia. So
that's expected.
Yeah. A few days ago, finally, President Xi made a call to President Zelensky, but I haven't seen any reports as to what was discussed between the two. As you know, the U.S. has threatened China that if they supply any weapons to
Mhm.
Russia, there will be major consequences. The Chinese have said that they are neutral. They are not supplying any weapons and they would like the war to end.
Mhm.
So at the moment, the Western policy is to exclude China and to confront China on a broad area, both political, military, and economic.
So, political in what way?
Politically, like any role that China may wish to play between Russia and Ukraine, or provide assistance to developing countries in Africa or elsewhere. They feel the Western position is that Chinese economic assistance to poor countries in Africa is increasing Chinese influence in Africa, and they don't want that to happen.
There is already so much influence of the West in poor countries in Africa. I mean, what's the problem if the Chinese do it a little bit too?
Well, the Chinese actually are building railways, they're building hospitals, they're building infrastructure for poor countries, which the West did not build. They made promises, but they didn't build. So the Western involvement in a lot of African countries is extractive. They're extracting minerals from Niger and elsewhere. The Chinese have not yet done that. We don't know whether they will also do it in the future. But for the time being, many African countries are going to China when they think that they need money to build hospitals, roads. There are some countries that are landlocked, and the Chinese have built railways for them through which they can send their exports to ports. So all of this is criticized in the West, that the Chinese are doing it for selfish reasons and not to help the poor countries. And the only people who can help the poor countries are the West, conveniently forgetting that it was the West that colonized Africa and it was Western countries that did the slave trade.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay,
So in that case,
nobody remembers.
all right, Richard
Yeah.
Denton?
well, we remember, but I mean, this is why I'm just wondering. Okay, this is one thing that the Chinese do that we don't like. But then, if they try to intervene, why just throw them out? I don't know. I
Well,
have
the
no
Chinese
idea
are
either way.
also claiming a lot of islands in the Pacific area, and also waters that are claimed by Vietnam, Philippines, and other Southeast Asian countries. So that has created some tensions in the Pacific as well with China's neighbors. This is all for economic gain, potential deep sea mining, fisheries, and so on. So China is not entirely blameless either.
Oh yeah, perfect, nobody is, but
Okay.
thing is to stop a war, a Holocaust.
Lita, let's have Richard Denton have a crack at the microphone, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Meta. And again, I want to also thank Michael Cohen and Al Jubitz for their comments. Right now, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, IPPNW, is having their first in-person meeting in Mombasa. And they're coming out with a statement wanting a ceasefire. Now, the statement says also at the moment that they want Russia to withdraw its forces from Ukraine. To Tariq then, to me, I see this as a precondition to a ceasefire, and therefore can't see that Russia would be acceptable to that. What is your comments on a ceasefire and people putting in preconditions?
Yes, this is a very controversial issue. So those who support those who call for a ceasefire are criticized that this means that Russia gets to keep the territory that it has conquered, and that this will then freeze the situation as we have in Cyprus, between India and Pakistan and Kashmir and so on. And there are others who say we can only have a ceasefire once the Russians have withdrawn and ceded all territory occupied by Russia. So it's a no-win situation on either side. The one view is that the Russians would like to draw out this war till the end of the year. The US then will get into presidential elections next year. There is already fatigue among the Republicans and the right-wingers in the US in terms of the amount of money provided to Ukraine for armaments, and also in Europe. So it's really a very murky situation. And one would think that the UN Secretary General would be more active, but unfortunately he has not been that active. So this war is unfortunately going to continue for several more months, if not longer.
What do you think he could do that he's not doing?
Well, I think it's way too late now. As earlier on, he should have gone and used his office and influence and called for a meeting and set up a meeting between Ukraine and Russia. Didn't need to have the presidents. He could have the foreign ministers or others, but he didn't. He was perceived as being more leaning towards NATO. He's a former prime minister of Portugal, and in a lot of his actions, he has been perceived to be favoring the West. I don't know whether that's a fair conclusion, but that is the view among some of his critics, that he was not forceful enough earlier on.
Okay.
So then, Tariq, what do you see as a way to get a ceasefire? I mean, I think Lulu from Brazil there has said that we're not interested in war; we're interested in peace. You've got many countries, and the Pope have wanted this. We in Rotary, I think, certainly would like to see this. We have a Rotarian who has a computer program called Smart Settle that can help with mediation. It's based on the works of John Nash, the Nobel laureate from years ago, movie Beautiful Mind. And so I think there are ways to have a ceasefire and negotiation, but what is your solution?
I really don't see a solution, because more weapons are going into Ukraine, and Ukraine is being set up to launch this counteroffensive in the next few weeks. They believe that Russia has exhausted itself with its advanced weapons. Russia has not shown good generalship. Russia has not been able to interdict the supply lines in Ukraine. So the view among American generals is that the defeat of Russia is quite achievable. All we need to do is provide Ukraine the wherewithal, and the Ukrainians will do the fighting and achieve this objective. So until this policy changes, the fighting will continue. And you can find something similar on the Russian side. They also want to continue fighting because they don't want any advances being made by Ukraine.
As I understand it, a lot depends on the access to fighter planes. And so far, that's not been given to Ukraine. Is there any prospect of that changing?
Well, this has always been the case. Whenever Ukraine asks for something, they get it, and immediately they up the ante. But the US and the West has provided Ukraine with these so-called HIMARS, which are very accurate artillery systems and other artillery systems. They are reluctant to, for the time being, to provide fighter jets because they do not want Ukraine to attack targets inside Russia, because they feel that once that happens, that will escalate the war even further, and it could drag NATO into a direct war with Russia. At the moment, the dying is being done by the Ukrainians. It's not being done by the Americans, Canadians, or NATO countries. And that's what they are afraid of. So they want to give Ukraine enough not to have a crippling defeat, but they don't want to give Ukraine that much more that they can not only recover the lost territory, but also make inroads into Russia, because the policy of Ukraine is that Russia now needs to be broken up further into constituent elements so that Russia can never again be a threat in Europe. And that is also the policy of some of the arch conservatives in the US. This was a policy in the time of Senior Bush, and he stopped Cheney, Wolfowitz, and others from pursuing this. It came back on the agenda under Bush Jr., but then with Obama and so on, it sort of receded. And now, once again, these people say that this is now the time. And that's what Defense Secretary Austin has said very clearly. Strategic defeat of Russia means not only a military defeat, but breaking up some of its constituent republics, Tatarstan and others and so on, so that only a rump Russia is left. And they try to encourage China to see if they want to grab Siberia or break off Siberia into an autonomous or separated region.
Mhm.
If that happens,
Do you mind elaborating on that? Because I've heard that statement, but I've never heard anybody specify where these breaks are going to take place. I mean, it seems to me that most of the ethnically specific territories, like Chechnya and Armenia and so on, most of the places that are distinctively culturally separate have already more or less become independent. And I don't know that the rest of Russia is that diverse so that there's any logical place where you would fragment the country. Can you say where, if they were going to break it up, where would they break it?
they want to break it to a rump of the Slavic-speaking Russians, because there are still non-Slavic Russians, Tatars, and others. At the tip of my tongue, I don't have all these other nationalities, but there are several others who are ethnically not Slavic. But for a long time, they've been part of Mother Russia, going back to the Tsar's time and so on. So they want to fracture that. And then if they can have Siberia, because Siberia already feels that Moscow is not paying enough attention to it. A lot of resources from Siberia pay for buildings and roads in Moscow and so on. There are only a couple of cities in Siberia that can be considered modern. If you go outside Vladivostok and others places, it's still very much a rural economy. People have a really hard time living there. And already a lot of Chinese money is coming in, a lot of, also, this is ethnically a different, because of the China's one-child policy, many girl babies were either not born or they were, so there's a shortage. So we have an overhang of men. So these men are now going to Siberia to marry Russian women. And many Siberian women, I'm told, I don't, many of the men are drunk, so they rather have a husband who has some money and is not drunk out of his mind. So, but I know this is a sensitive thing, and I'm saying what I've read. I don't necessarily know whether this is true or not.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's new one for
I'm gonna
me.
go there.
Sorry?
Okay.
I'm gonna go there. If there are excessive men, of course.
Let's go back to our question of,
Married 50 years. So.
I don't think it's funny. I think it's very, very reasonable, but I think we should concentrate on the nuclear issue, because I think there are things that Tariq can answer that not many other people can.
Could I add a comment?
Yes, please.
Do people here think that all these factions could unite if we just discovered that Mars is going to attack our planet and take over, as we think extraterrestrials are coming around to do already?
I mean, look at Sudan.
Yeah.
The British will only evacuate British citizens. They will not evacuate anyone else. Even though some British Sudani citizens were evacuated by the French. The Americans are doing the same. So here, where you have citizens of many countries, you would think the humanitarian issue would be such that they would evacuate whoever needed evacuation. But again, nationalism is at play, just as it was with vaccine diplomacy for COVID. So unfortunately, this nationalism in the human race is becoming worse rather than better in the short term.
I want to see whether or not it may be that Alexei Prokorenko, now in Warsaw, has anything special to say to Tariq about the comments on the military situation. What's the perspective in Warsaw these days, Alexei?
Hello everyone. I'm very happy to see you again 1 month later. Thank you, Tariq, for such insightful comments. In fact, your remarks about Siberia demonstrate that you have a very profound knowledge of the subject. Indeed, you painted a very precise picture, very precise and concise, including the population, including alcoholism, whatever. And let's add to that many young men, mostly young men, men of reproductive age, dying in the war. The picture will be even more gruesome than it may appear, which means that in the long run, the cloud of China will be even stronger in Siberia than it is now. I living in Warsaw, I'm becoming unfortunately or fortunately a bit estranged from Russian politics because I haven't been in the country for more than half a year, for 7+ months already, which means I get
we should, and I should have introduced you as a Russian living in Warsaw and someone who left Russia in order to avoid being conscripted and sent to kill Ukrainians, right? So that's why
absolutely right.
you may be losing touch with your homeland.
Well, my contacts are limited to talks with my friends, to reading different mass media, to reading Telegram channels, but I don't have the fresh feeling I had back in September or October when I first came to Turkey, then to Poland. My perspective has become a little bit stale. It was predictable, but it so happened. And I feel kind of out of touch with all the nuances of the situation there, only, and that applies to everyone else, right? I kind of get some anecdotal evidence of how situation looks, of how it might develop. As you remember, I was optimistic last time. Was quite optimistic about the spring. Well, tide has changed a little bit, and now I'm more balanced in my predictions, my opinions. Shame on me, but I might have been overly optimistic about the spring. The Ukrainian offensive is not beginning yet. We don't know how it will go, because Putin's forces are very well entrenched. They have very good fortifications, which means that the battle will be severe, unfortunately, and it most certainly will not be the last battle of the war. And I don't know what really will become of it.
Well, let me pose a question that is a bit closer to your own situation, and that is that, as you know, you've already been on one of my forums when I had a conversation with two other men who are Russian, who've left Russia. One of them is in Tashkent, because he left about the same time you did to avoid being conscripted and sent to fight in the war because he's opposed to the war. Now, since then, Andrei, the other man who's been living in Kyiv for many number of years, contacted me and asked me to see what I could do to help some of the other people in your situation, only maybe a little bit worse, because some of these people, I don't think you're in any danger of being extradited and deported and sent back to Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But according to Andrei Kamenshikov, something he knows of about 40 cases of men who are to some extent vulnerable to being sent back because there is an extradition treaty between Russia and some of these other countries, notably Kazakhstan,
Mm-hmm.
saying that if any Russian that is indicted as a criminal can be, they can require them to be extradited and deported back to Russia. So some of these people are considered criminals just because they refuse to be inducted in the army.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, he knows of about 40 cases where they may be in grave danger. If you look at today's New York Times, this is there's a big article about, I think it's on the front page, at least on my Kindle version of the New York Times, an article about the situation of Russian men who are in exactly that predicament. And as some of you may know, Dmitry Medvedev recently actually made a statement to the effect that they should go kill these people, execute them wherever, even if they don't come back to Russia, they should obliterate them. Now, I don't know exactly the conditions under which he expects to do this, but it is that alone, I should think, would give sufficient grounds for anybody in that situation to be able to claim to be a refugee. And now, I have been in one of the people that Andrei was mentioning is a Russian who got in touch with me day before yesterday. We had a long conversation about whether or not I could help him immigrate to Canada. And as I understand it, it takes forever to get immigration papers. And he'd be, if they're going to send him back, it would be over by then. But a better option, according to my friend Doug Saunders, is for such a person to come on a tourist visa, visitor's visa. And then once they're in Canada, declare that they want to be refugees. And that way they have a better chance of quickly getting. That doesn't mean it's quick, because this man has already applied for a visitor's visa 6 months ago and it hasn't happened yet. So I intend to do what I can to help him and to other people in his situation. But I want to recruit any of you folks who want to participate in this kind of rescue mission to contact your MP and to see what can be done to save these people, because they, in some cases, it literally may be a life and death matter. I may be exaggerating, but it certainly is a serious matter for all of them. Am I stating this correctly, or does anybody have any amendments to make in what I just said? Alexei, do you think that is inaccurate?
This is accurate to a certain extent, because Russian influence in countries of the former Soviet republics like Kazakhstan, like Armenia, like even Georgia, in spite of the formal war with Georgia, in spite of the fact that Russia has occupied parts of that country, about 20% of Georgia is occupied by Russia right now. In spite of all of that, Russia still has a very strong lobby group influence in those countries. But for what I know, there's been only one case when a Russian refugee, I think it was an officer, an intelligence officer, he was deported from Kazakhstan, I think. But it was just a separate case. He was there was a kind of trial or something, but it was
Excuse me, I think that's
1 year ago.
the case of the guy mentioned in describing jail in today's New York Times article.
Mm-hmm.
I think it probably is.
Well, I've got to read the article, definitely. Thank you for this. But I think there is a bigger risk for the people living abroad, living in countries like Kazakhstan. It's quite an objective risk. I'm not suggesting any solution to it, because it's not any obligation of those countries to help Russian refugees economically. Some people come back because they don't find a job. They don't have money to live on. And that drives them back to the country. Some were leaving when the draft began, mobilization in September. Some were leaving just they left their coffee, literally they left their coffee on the counter, and they jumped on board of a plane and left. It was crazy. And then they were probably expecting to kind of wait a little bit, a couple of days or weeks until things settle down. But things haven't settled down, and not everyone, by far not everyone, has the means to live that long without a job, without speaking the local language or whatever. As for Dmitry Medvedev, he's said to have drinking problems because he has never really been shown in public for months, which is strange for our era of video communications. It could have happened like 10 years ago or 20 years ago. You could have appeared in newspapers only, but now it's strange for a politician of that magnitude to never be shown on TV or whatever, online or videos anywhere. And all that he is very scandalous in what he's writing. He makes very outlandish remarks about using nuclear weapons. So he's like, there was a politician named Zhirinovsky, maybe he died 1 year ago. He used to be like a clown of our politics. Now his place is not vacant. It has been taken by Medvedev. And so once the war began, but probably he's trying to regain his position, to actualize himself as a successor to Putin once again. Probably that's how he's trying to earn his position, earn back the trust of Putin and his cronies. And that's how it looks. So I wouldn't really rely on his words literally, but that's probably that probably indicates the sentiment. So if someone introduces any kind of punishment for those who have left the country due to mobilization or whatever, I'm afraid that the public will embrace that. Probably it's not a matter of life and death, but if there is some punishment, the people will welcome that, given the degree of propaganda that is now being bestowed on people's heads, and no one will oppose it anyway.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's not very, very hopeful news, but we've gone around and around a little bit. I'm open now for anybody who wants to talk about something different. I noticed that Peter Wadhams is here, and Peter is always good for some controversial information about Arctic ice. Do you have anything, Peter, that you want to bring us up to date on about that? By the way, before we drift too far off from that, there is an article in the New Yorker now about the notion of using little glass nano bubbles, tiny bubbles made of glass, which they would scatter on ice in the Arctic, and this would slow the melting of the ice. And the name of the game is to slow the melting of the ice. So I'm interested in whether or not I'd heard about this before, but the New Yorker article treats it as a serious proposition, and I hadn't taken it seriously. Tell me what you think about that, and then other news of the day about our melting world.
Okay, well, obviously the news about Ukraine is far more important, but still, firstly, this bubbles or glass beads. As far as I'm concerned, there's nothing to it at all. But
I'm sorry, I say it again.
There's nothing to it at all. But the person who invented glass beads, Leslie Field, who's from the US, believes in it, and she's been doing lots of experiments where you take very small originally glass beads, and then finally tiny fragments of glass that you put down over ice where it's melting, and the idea is to prevent the ice from melting, or to prevent it from melting too quickly, and then that way you can work with areas of ice that are still around when they shouldn't be, and that applies to a lot of areas in the world where you really need to keep the ice present. But she's only done those experiments in over small areas, sort of ponds, and I've worked there with her, and I mean, I just don't believe that it's doing anything. So that's the glass beads. But for the rest of what's going on at the moment, the big threat seems to be that the ocean is warming very much faster than it used to be. In fact, it's now reached a factor of 7 compared to the speed at which the ocean surface waters were warming. So this is a huge acceleration, exponential growth in seawater temperatures, and nobody knows why it's happening. But it's a factor. It is a factor of about 7 in the Arctic compared to other parts of the ocean. So it used to be when I was working in the Arctic a lot, we'd have about 2 to 3 times the speed of warming of the Arctic compared to other parts of the ocean, and we'd have to work on that basis of how fast various other parts of the world were warming up. But now that factor has just gone up to 7 without any knowledge.
I'd heard of 4, that the Arctic was melting 4 times as fast as the rest, warming 4 times as fast as the rest of the world. But now you're saying 7 times as fast.
Yes, if you look at the seas north of Europe, that is the Barents Sea, Kara Sea, the seas around Spitsbergen, that's 7 times, which is just incredible, because that's an amount of warming which will get rid of all the sea ice very quickly, and will make other changes as well. And in fact, the temperature changes have been incredible as well. When you look at those, the biggest warming has been in the seas northeast of Europe, northeast of America, that is Canada, the very waters that we thought about being the place we should go to preserve sea ice. But instead, in fact, it's warming the fastest of all there. And there have been measurements of a warming of about 13 degrees in the seas north of Newfoundland and Labrador. And 13 degrees is simply not something that ever happens before. You know, you get changes in climate, changes in weather systems, changes in everything now, but it's always something measurable, something you can handle, like 2 or 3 degrees, and that's it. But this is now.
But, Peter, I mean, I hate to be, put it this way, but look, if it were 2 or 3 degrees, then there are various kinds of geoengineering, if you'll pardon the expression, we don't like to use the word, but technological interventions that might slow it down. But if you're talking about 13 degrees, it's game over, isn't it? There isn't anything available that can possibly slow anything that's going 13 degrees warmer than it's supposed to be, right?
Yes, that's right. It's a game over situation. But when we look at the oceanographers who are working there, it's only just been discovered how rapid this growth is. And they're sort of numbed. Like you normally, when you look at ocean scientists, they're always very confident about, they measure something in the ocean, which is a bit odd. They'll say, we have discovered that such and such a sea is now warmed up by 1 degree. It's always, we have discovered, because they really like to discover things that they can publish and get promotion on. But in this case, we've got they're incredibly hesitant to say we have discovered, because if people accept that this is going on, they have to try and explain it, and there's absolutely no explanation for why there should be such a rapid, huge growth rate in temperature of North Atlantic water. It's something which can't be explained, and so therefore scientists say nothing about it until they can come up with some explanation. So it's mysterious silence coming from the scientific community about these extraordinary warming rates of the ocean.
Well, I mean, I'd settle for no explanation for why if somebody had a good explanation for what to do about it. But there's nobody with anything like as effective an intervention as would be required to reverse heating of that magnitude, right?
Yes, right. There's no known way that if you look at, say, northeastern Atlantic and it's warmed up by that amount, what can you do? What do you do? There's nothing that you can think of that you can actually do that will stop that. It's a bit like in Siberia, the warming rates that are going on because of methane outbreaks, sort of methane explosions going on, and there have huge amounts of heat involved there, and not to mention the fact that a lot of the tundra is caught fire and is burning away perpetually. But there's still not enough known about how you might possibly deal with it for people to talk about it. So again, there's a sort of code of silence or omerta about the problems with Siberia and Siberian methane outbreaks. That's another forbidden topics that scientists don't like to talk about unless they can see some solution. And if they don't see the solution, they just hope that nobody will notice that it's happening.
Peter Brogden.
Yeah, a particular question regarding warmth in eastern North America for short periods that was really very marked. And you're saying that all the warm water off the coast of Labrador is quite remarkable. And is it possibly the same cause or the warmth that happened at the end of the Ice Age, that is about 10,500 years ago, that the temperatures that were measured but were basically from the ice cores of Greenland. And of course, they don't show the peaks that clearly because after all, the ratio of the isotopes that they're using to measure really wouldn't change quite fast enough if they had, like we have had in this past spring, even 3 or 4 days of real warm weather. And I'm just wondering whether there could have been a larger rise in temperature than the possibly 7 to 10 degrees at that time when the ice changed so quickly and started melting very rapidly throughout, well, I'm talking about Algonquin Park area in particular, if you can picture where that is in Ontario. But that there's quite a bit of evidence that there were extreme water flows because things were held back because of the ice dams and things like that. And these extreme water flows have produced wells through the grinding up of rocks that got circulated in the wells and things like that. So there's evidence that there was remarkable water flows in small creeks, quite small creeks, virtually negligible these days. But obviously the traces could be of quite warm weather. Do you know much more about present thinking in that?
Well, no, it depends if we're talking about these are kind of fossil flows, so to speak, of the way the world was during the end of the last ice age. That's one thing, but the things that are happening now are unprecedented and sudden, and this temperature rise is very sudden and frightening for that reason that you don't expect water to warm up that quickly. What's warming it? I mean, you have to supply heat to warm the water, and if you're looking at the Northeast Atlantic, then you're dealing with a part of the world that's where you think you have some confidence about how warm it is, how it changes with season. If you think about all the people who've worked up there and sailed up there, Wilfrid Grenfell and so on, and they know what temperatures the water will reach, and so everything is you feel confident and happy about it until suddenly you go and take a thermometer out and it gives you a temperature that's 10 or 13 degrees warmer than it has any right to be. It's a frightening discovery and nobody knows how to explain it.
You like them? Do you have a thought about it?
Yeah. I've got a question for you, Peter, either one of you. It seems to me that as we lose the ice caps at both the north and south, that must be having an effect upon the orbit of the Earth. Because when we had a full, let's say, Arctic and Antarctic layers of ice and so forth, that stabilized our planet. But with it going away, what's the effect of that?
Well, actually, that's a good point. In fact, I wrote a paper about that with a colleague. I'm not quite sure that I remember the point we made, but the person who thought about that a lot was Walter Munk, and he's a kind of god. Well, he actually died recently at the age of 102, but he was the sort of god of oceanography. Everybody acknowledges him as the person who did more in oceanography than anybody else. He's a great man, and we wrote a paper together on changes due to sea ice and what it was doing. And he thought, well, look, you're dumping all this extra ice onto the ice sheets, and you are changing the rotation of the Earth because you're changing the what's the name of trying to remember my O-level physics. It's when you have something rotating with a bigger moment arm, then
Coriolis force.
Well, it's moment of inertia. But anyway, the thing is, you will change the rate of rotation of the Earth by a tiny amount if you alter where you put the ice. If you melt the ice, or you just redistribute it, put it somewhere further away from the equator or closer to the equator. It's how far it is from the equator that matters. Yeah. So we wrote that up, and then he died soon after that, and that was it as far as.
Could they measure it? I mean, if there had been a change in the orbit or something, I don't know what the word is, but if there had been a change, wouldn't it have been detected with some, I don't know, satellites or something?
Oh yes, I mean, I'm sure the time we wrote that was some time ago, a few years ago. But what you can do now is use this satellite called GRACE, which means gravity satellite. It's very, very clever. It's actually two satellites close together, few kilometers apart, flying around the world together. And as you fly, and they're very heavy, deliberately heavy. And when you fly over the edge of a continent, like the edge of Greenland, one of the satellite that's in the lead speeds up because of the change in the mass that's underneath it. And then the second satellite catches up on it. And they are very, very accurate lasers to work out how far they are apart. So these satellites slightly change their relative positions all through the orbital period, and you can work out how heavy it is. Well, how heavy is the ice underneath? So it would tell you the volume of the Greenland ice sheet, for instance, which you could never do before. So that ought to also show what would happen if you altered the amount of ice due to this satellite orbit thing. So I'm sure that we can measure it, and somebody has measured it, I'm sure. So it all, in theory, can be solved, and we can see what's going on. But I don't know if that's been done properly or whether it's been sort of left standing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now some other folks here we haven't talked about. Some of you are newbies, people I don't recognize. If you haven't spoken yet, and if I don't know who you are, why don't you put your hand up and let's get acquainted. Anybody? Here, let's have a gallery view. So those of you who have not spoken yet and whom I have not recognized, I can do so. Anybody? All right, well, then that's not what we'll do next. We'll go to somebody that we do know. How about Charles Tauber? Let's get back in touch with Croatia.
Hi. Well, for people who don't know where I am and what I'm doing, I'm in the town of Vukovar, eastern Croatia, one of the first battles of the war here 30 years ago. And I'm working mostly online all over the world with various people in conflict countries on teaching how to deal with traumatization, psychological traumatization. And it's pretty shocking right now. The situation in Congo, Burundi, Liberia is pretty awful. We're trying to get in touch with people in northern Syria as well, and in Turkey, And by the way, if anybody has contacts in these places, please send them to me and we will contact them. There is very little psychological work going on in these places, and what there is very short term. And it's desperately needed, and it will have impact not only immediately but for generations, because we know about the transmission. We're certainly seeing that in Congo. In Congo, it's pretty shocking right now. There are lots of children who have been thrown out of their homes by their parents simply because the parents can't afford it. They're former child soldiers, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a very great need for work with children and young people there. And Liberia, there's a great deal of drug addiction from the Civil War 20, 30 years ago. And we're working with a drug rehabilitation unit there. We haven't had contact with Sudan yet. I would like, again, if anybody has contacts there, I would like to. We're working virtually 24 hours a day, it's fair to say. And I'm thoroughly and totally exhausted. We're trying to write letters. I'm trying to write stuff, but I'm not really getting to it. I don't know what to say.
Well, let me ask you about Romeo Dallaire's project with child soldiers. I've never been able to get an interview with him. I should keep trying, I guess, but I know he has some project, and I don't know whether he's actually got people on the ground in places like Congo, actually working with child soldiers, or is this what does that operation have to offer, if anything?
I don't know. I wrote their head of operations, whose name is Shelley Thompson. I wrote her a letter, didn't get an answer. From what I can see, they're in Halifax. And from what I can gather, they're doing mostly material aid. But we think that, and we're trying to work with a couple of groups in Burundi and in Congo who are doing work with the children directly. As I say, it's pretty awful stuff. They don't have money, they don't have staff. We want to train at least some of them. And by the way, anybody here who has any contacts and who wants training, it doesn't cost anything to you. It cost me a bit of time, but I really love working with people. So, and I really love doing these groups. So anybody should write to me.
If you have a desire to be a barefoot therapist, Charles is your man. Right?
Yep. And we're also doing a lot of work in Nigeria now. We have a couple of groups in Nigeria. And in Nigeria, there's a great deal of trafficking to all the Central African regions, but also obviously to Europe. And huge numbers of trafficked women and some trafficked men as well. This is horrible stuff, and we also are traumatized by it. By the way, it's still going on here. If you go into a cafe or a restaurant here, and bear in mind the war ended in 95, you still get a lot of drunken people who are talking about their own traumatization. Nobody's doing anything except giving lots and lots of drugs in weird and wonderful combinations. It's very disturbing. And one of the first jobs I have when we get a new client is to get them off drugs. And of course, that's a slow process. You can't just stop it. You can't just.
Can you do it at all? I mean, I have the feeling that you know that sometimes it never works.
No, it doesn't sometimes. And we've had some, but you have to have enormous amounts of patience and persistence to do any of this work.
Well, you have, and I, you know, I speak for all of us, I think, in saying that we really thank you for what you do. Every time you come on, I want to give you a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
See, Erica Simpson has joined us. Hello, Erica. How's everything in London, Ontario? You got to unmute.
I know. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask as usual, Meta. Yeah, no, I'm doing well. I am preparing the, as we speak, the final speakers list and the program for the Canadian Peace Research Association meeting, which will be at York University. So nobody that is here except for Rose Dyson is going to be a speaker. But I do have 30 prominent speakers from Canada and also across the world. So it's exciting, but it's also a lot of work because I have to get their biographies and headshots and time program and order catering and all that. So it goes on and on. But that's why I'm at work on a Sunday afternoon, very wet and cold out.
Yes, we should announce who you are, that you're the president of, describe your organization.
It's a Scholarly Association of Peace Research academics, activists, and a few diplomats. And they meet every year at a different university in Canada as part of the Congress of the Humanities and Social Sciences. So if you would like to join, it is at this point very expensive to come to the Congress because you're supposedly late. And so it's over $400. But if you had registered before, it's fairly good for retired and also students. And there'll be a lot of students this year. And Meta was the honorary recipient of the Canadian Peace Research Association's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2022. So we were really honored to have her there. And we are still featuring Meta's curriculum vitae on our website. I believe it's got 50 pages of publications. It's 90 pages long. It's crazy. But anyway,
it's just
there. It's really long, but it's great. It's full of publications. So this is what we're doing.
Good work. I mean,
Rose Dyson received it the year before that.
That's right. And Rose is right here.
We awarded it to both Rose and to you in 2022. And so Rose, I got to tell you a funny story about Rose because Rose gave a lecture and I showed it to my students the other day. And this student wrote in and said she wanted to meet with Dr. Dyson, and she wanted to correct Dr. Dyson. And so I said, well, before you get into correcting her, what is it you want to correct her about? She says, well, she referred to this video called First Shooter Assassin. It really should be, and it was something else. And I say to myself, this is my life, correcting students about the name of a video for Dr. Dyson. I said, you know what? I don't think that's important enough for me to email Dr. Dyson. She made a tiny error. She got the video wrong. It's not Assassin First Shooter. It's War of Warfare. God knows. But anyway, that's what I feel.
Well, I'm glad you found it useful, Erica.
Oh, yeah.
Was your student somebody who was playing the game? I mean, I'd be interested if Peace Studies students go out in their spare time and play shoot 'em up video games.
Yeah, well,
you probably do.
They probably do.
There have to be reasons why video games are one of the best stock options or best investments you can make on the stock market. Or at least they were a couple of years ago. I don't think they've gone down that much. They're still very popular and frequently featured and promoted, even on the CBC. And people wring their hands and wonder about why there are so many mass murders. As you know, Meta, you have interviewed my colleague, U.S. Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, who also a psychologist who's written extensively and done research on the subject and traces the rise of mass murders in U.S. and to some extent around the world with the introduction into the market popular culture commodities of violent first-person shooter video games. So there, I've got my pitch in.
You did, and you know, one of the interesting things I found in his book, and that book is now 3 or 4 years old, he said that every single case, without exception, every one of these kids who had done a mass murder in like schools or wherever, that they had been practicing on video games. And in fact, they developed their skills. You can become quite a good marksman by using this video game because you actually can be quite a sharpshooter because of doing it. But every one of them had been obsessed with video games. That has to be a serious thing.
But the industry lobbyists are extraordinarily successful in managing to avoid having attention focused on these games as a causal factor. I mean, consider the mass murder in Canada that took place a couple of years ago in Nova Scotia. The people that I work with, Grossman and others, say that the trajectory of those murders comes right out of the playbook of Grand Theft Auto series. But the mass inquiry that was launched at considerable government and taxpayer expense on it, they didn't even touch that subject, although we did try to get to focus some attention on it.
So is that the psychologist you mentioned is Grossman? This is Don Smith. Is the psychology that you mentioned Dr. Grossman?
Yes, David Grossman.
What was his first name?
David Grossman.
David. Okay, so interestingly, online, I've just recently met two people who were, I know we're trying to change it, this is a tangent from the purpose of this meeting, but I recently met two people online who are in debt. And somebody said there's somebody with $18,000 of debt from video games, because in these competitive games, you know, you have skills, but if you pay money, you can level up and get extra powers.
Yes, it's addictive, and I think the World of Warcraft is one of those games where individuals are encouraged to pay something like $15 a month just to participate in these games, but they have become so addictive that they do lead to debt in many cases. In fact, there's some sort of a therapy session developed online called Woaholics Anonymous, sort of patterned after Alcoholics Anonymous. But yes, addiction is a very serious problem, and the gambling aspect of it too, which carries over into sports now. You know, there's also morphed into e-sport, which is becoming a popular thing with all the problems that have been involved and with us for some time with addictive gambling.
Interesting.
Erica, if any of your students or any of your activists want training, also in working with perpetrators, we stand recommended. We're more than willing to do that, to start online groups.
What do you mean by perpetrators, Alex or Charles?
I mean people who are committing gender-based violence, sexual violence, abuse of children, all the rest of it. We're seeing an enormous amount of it. And our point is that the answer is not to put them in jail, because they're just going to be with other people who are doing the same things in the jails. So you absolutely have to have treatment. You have to have restorative rehabilitative justice in terms of this. In other words, deal with them, treat them as well, not so much punish them as treat them. And that has also cultural implications, some very large ones, again, in places like Nigeria, Congo, here. But this is stuff we do. We teach people how to do that.
Well, actually, Erica, there's another person coming to the conference that works precisely in the field that of trying to address issues of human sex trafficking and so on, and the dangers and the problems that you envisage. And that's Charlene Doak-Gabur, who's based in your area in London, Ontario. She is chairing an international organization called Internet Sense First, and has meetings once a month or so. I participate on behalf of Canada, but we do have at least one participant from Nigeria. I do not remember her name offhand, but she has also talked, as you have, Charles, about how serious and widespread the problem of sexual exploitation and human trafficking is in your part of the world. I don't know that specific treatments approaches have been established, but there's a discussion of that happening. And of course, all or most countries around the world are trying to do something about bringing forward legislation, and we have it in Canada here. There must be about 2 or 3 different bills that are being discussed in Ottawa as we speak, but this has been going on for a long time without so far much evidence of success.
Well, we think that it's very difficult to do this at national levels or at academic levels, that you have to do it at village level and at individual level. And so that's where our concentration is, because and this goes back to several WHO reports, World Health Organization reports, that are saying that 90%, over 90%, and I repeat that number, over 90% of people who should be getting some sort of psychological assistance are not getting it.
Yeah, Charles, I'd like to, with your permission, I'd like to put you in touch with this individual in the.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, your email address is
on the chat.
Okay, thank you.
If it's not on the chat, I'll put it there again.
Okay, Meta, apart from, if I could just interrupt for a minute, I did do a lot of media in the last 2 weeks, a lot, and I see Alexia is here. So once again, this was on NATO spending, Canada's relatively low spending, 1.27% of GDP. The guy in Hamilton attacked me so much that our media relations guy heard about it and said, this is crazy. And he listened to it. It was just this diatribe by the announcer about how Canada needs to spend more. So I said to him, well, how much do you want to spend? 2.5%? 3%? Anyway, so a lot of the media, I did a Hill Times article on the 2% as well. And then the other thing the media has really focused on in the last month is this nuclear burial site. I wrote an article for the Hill Times on that, but that was not the focus of the media. The focus was Elizabeth May and 7 other MPs held all these meetings in Ottawa. Maybe, Richard, you were involved. I know that quite a few people, Bill Noel and so on, were involved in just informing members of Parliament about the risks of a nuclear burial site so close to the Great Lakes, essentially 50 miles, less than 50 miles from the Great Lakes and in the Great Lakes water basin. So I've been working on that for the last 10 or 11 years. It's been a busy month, Meta, what with NATO spending, nuclear burial, and then also what Rose is pointing to, which my students also, Rose, just to reassure you, also watch Charlene online. And so they are very aware of her email address and her London-based charitable foundation. So that's all going ahead. There's 2,000 students, so maybe a couple of them will decide. A lot of them are nurses or in pre-med school or medical health sciences. So maybe they'll go, but I can't recommend them, Charles, to go to Africa because we're not allowed to recommend that students travel to outside of Canada because of insurance reasons. So I will be the last person that can help you to recommend that students go to Africa. I'm not allowed to do that. It's too dangerous, and that's the end.
Sorry, we work mostly online.
Yeah, Charles, I know what you work on. I'm just telling you, I can't recommend that university students go and live and work locally without.
No, they don't have to go and work locally. They can
No,
be
but
online.
I won't be recommending it. I will recommend Charlene's charitable foundation based in Canada, but I just can't start doing international ones that are working locally in Africa. I can't do that as a professor, but that's all. As far as nuclear burial and NATO spending, I think maybe your callers are interested in that, and then I'll be quiet. Thank you for this opportunity, Meta.
Charles, I think you're saying that you can train them to do it by Zoom, right?
Exactly. And that's exactly what we do.
So they don't go there.
They don't have to go there.
Erica, they sit at their computers and do therapy. Barefoot. Right. I'm barefoot right now, but I'm not doing therapy.
That's right. We have about 20 groups or 15 groups like that. And that works. And they're extremely grateful because they continually say to me, hey, nobody's listening to us. And that's the key to all of this, listening. That they're not getting the pressure of. These people are exploding. And they need.
But Charles, you've got to understand, as a professor, I cannot recommend students give counseling and therapy by Zoom to abusive people who are pedophiles and so on. I would be the last person to do that. I can't do that. Don't you understand that?
Fine, Erica, do what you want.
No,
I'm expressing a need.
Yeah.
And I'm expressing what I do.
I just want to be on the record saying that we can't do that at universities.
Could I
We're not even trained.
Yes, go ahead, Al.
Could I add that I've worked with students and we've used, what's happening is that people are the nature of people is being abused by abusive relationships, especially in early childhood. They stay right on. But what we do is we have them go back to nature in their backyard, and they put that. No, this is all funny and everything, but when you do this, and we have studies that show this, whenever you do this, in the moment that you do it, and continuing moments like that, you do that, this disappears. And I put students together for years in a community, and it's all disappeared because every time it happened, you go back to where you're being abused, your nature's being abused in the moment, and you reverse that by having a tree talk to the treeness in you, and you talk to the treeness in it, and the words that come out unify.
Okay, Michael, I think I don't have much more time, but I would like to, I have not given the floor yet to the Wildlife of California. And we have Marilyn and we have Bill Lycum here who work with foxes and big cats. So I want to know how their animals are faring this month in California. Hello, Marilyn.
Okay, first of all, I want to address something that Michael, Dr. Cohen was saying. I was just wondering if you have read An Immense World by Ed Yong. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is that because you were talking about nonverbal communication and verbal communication, etc. And that is it's a fabulous book. And it's about how animals communicate in different ways and how important their senses are and things like that. And so I just wanted to mention that to you.
We have 54 senses that we don't use. We say we have 5, but we use 54. And when they have those 54 connecting, this disappears. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay, well, you might like to read this book. It's wonderful. And I'll put it on the chat in a minute. The work I'm doing is just so local. It's not this wonderful international scope that I'm hearing, which is just opening my eyes and my ears to listen to all this. As you know, I'm working with our local mountain lions and bobcats, and I'm interested in how urbanization as well as climate change is affecting their behaviors. But what's happened is that it has really progressed to all the wildlife, okay, and it's even expanding beyond that. I'm right now writing an article. I'm hoping I'll get it done within the next couple of weeks. And it is about how everything is influencing everything and how people are doing not so fabulous things that's having just even little things that are having immense impact on wildlife. So I'm working on that. There's some other things too that I'm working with about connectivity. Also with some native groups as far as stewardship, okay, with the land. So anyway, a little bit about what I've been up to.
Okay. Bill, how are your foxes?
Well, with only 2 foxes to monitor, they're doing very well. I have to. I'm studying the behavior of the gray fox, and it's the first study of its kind in the world. Right? It never happened before, and I'm getting a lot of good publicity out of it. There was a documentary that was just made about my journey over to Zurich, Switzerland, because I was collaborating with Katharina Weichel at the university. And the documentary is posted on our website. I run the Urban Wildlife Research Project. And if you go there, .org, if you go there, you can check it out, check out the documentary, and see more of what I've been up to international.
Last time we talked, your 2 foxes had a marital spat, and as I recall, one of them attacked the other one. Have they divorced or have they reconciled?
Oh no, they've reconciled. But I think I mentioned one time that I did actually document a gray fox divorce.
Oh no, I didn't know that. Really? Okay.
I did.
Exactly how does a divorce take place? Does one of them simply go off with another partner, or do they have a little ceremony?
No, the male took off with another female. But in the case of the
that's just
culture,
like men.
in the case of the cultures, it's not the male that does anything. It's the female that chooses who she's going to be with. And so in the case of the divorce, she just convinced Brownie was his name. She just convinced him to come with her.
Oh, so she seduced him.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. The adventures of California gray foxes. That's, I like to have our soap opera ending for this kind of conversation. So thank you very much for this little drama. And we will get back together in another month. Does anybody have anything? Oh, Alexi's got a big heart showing. Hello, let's put your heart. So no, it didn't show. It went away. Anyway, we send you our love too, Alexi. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody send love to Warsaw, and if you have any left over, send it to the right people in Russia. Okay.
Thank you.
Any surplus love is gladly appreciated to be distributed among worthy Russians. So thank you very much for
Thank you.
attending, everybody. And we will get back together again. Please, in another, maybe overnight, but maybe a couple of days, I will put up the recording of this on our website, to savetheworld.ca. You can look at it and then you can comment on it and you can share anything there. Your chat will be visible there, and you can argue with each other or correct each other as you like. Okay?
All right.
Guys, okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you.
So,